This is part one of two sections of interviews that were done with David E. Scherman.
There's a wonderful photograph that you took of Lee in the bath in the Prince Regent's Platz, wasn't it?
Yeah, 27 Prince Regentenplatz in Munich was the home of Hitler, which a bunch of GIs had simply taken over as a place to crash. And there was a bathroom there with hot water and a tub, and we hadn't seen a bathtub for weeks. So Lee immediately jumped into the bathtub, and I photographed her, and I locked the door so we wouldn't be disturbed. And suddenly there was this tremendous banging on the door. The lieutenant was dying to get in and shave. And he said, get out of there. Whoever you are, you've been in there too long. And that was the spot that we got some GIs to read a copy of Hitler's Mein Kampf with their feet up on Hitler's bed, lying on Hitler's pillow, which was really, it was sort of the last of the Hitler myth right there in that spot that night.
Scherman mentions Berchtesgaden a lot. What was Berchtesgaden and what happened there?
Berchtesgaden is rather a beautiful small town on the Austrian border, just on the edge of Obersalzberg. Now, Lee and Scherman got there after they had been in Munich, and when they arrived, there was this plume of smoke on the horizon. The American Army headquarters was in the Post Hotel, and so Scherman and Miller went there, and they sweet-talked the chief of staff at that point, the Colonel Heintges, to allow them to take a couple of volunteer guys in a jeep and go ahead of the front line of the army to see what the smoke was about, because they had a shrewd idea that was emanating from Hitler's house at Wochenfeld.
This is his mountain retreat.
His mountain retreat.
Summer HQ, is it?
Yes, it was more than just a retreat. It was a headquarters, because behind and underneath the house, tunneled into solid rock, was this massive complex of tunnels. You can go there as a tourist now, but at that moment it was thought to be stuffed full of Germans who were going to fight to the last bullet. When Lee and Scherman and the two GIs in their jeep got to Obersalzberg, they found that Hitler's house was absolutely blazing, because the SS, instead of fighting to the last man, had set fire to it and melted into the bushes. Now, Scherman and Miller took very similar shots. They were clearly just standing beside each other. One of the key shots is Scherman standing with his back to Lee, holding a flash gun. And she's on open shutter, and he fires the flash gun so it illuminates the building, which is burning. But of course it needs some backlight on it, otherwise you wouldn't have got the shot.
This is taken at night time?
Yes, it's at night. In combat, first of all, you don't go around with, showing lights. Secondly, you don't stand in a silhouetted position. So they were both silhouetted against the light of the fire and against the ridge on which they were standing.
And ahead of the Allies.
Yeah, well, they were in enemy territory.
Yeah.
All the defenders of Obersalzberg could have been hiding in the bushes. They would have been an easy shot for a sniper. But they so wanted that picture that they were prepared to take the risk. Sherman later described it as the funeral pyre of the Third Reich. And I think that is such an amazing kind of way of looking at it, because it was known at that moment that Hitler and Eva Braun had killed themselves. It was known that the end of the war could only have been days away. And so this was like the signing off of that whole ghastly episode of the war. In some ways, Lee found the end of the war very hard to cope with. So we wanted to find out more about how Sherman observed it.
There wasn't the same camaraderie and fraternity. The morale had gone to pot because nobody was hanging in there together. It was like London after the war. For the first few minutes after the war was over, everybody was delighted in London, and then they discovered to their amazement that the morale which had kept them together, the glue which had kept the upper classes and the lower classes and the middle classes of London together for 6 horrible years, was the glue had gone. And everybody went his own way. And suddenly people began to be snippy and mean to one another. There was not the all pals together all pulled together attitude that there was during the war, which was so fabulous about London. London was the greatest place in the world to live during the war.